Okinawa, June 1945. The rain hadn't stopped in days, thick, metallic drops hammering the tin roofs of the American POW camp. Inside the mess tent, dozens of captured Japanese nurses huddled over bowls of watery soup when the loudspeaker crackled to life. All female personnel, the voice barked, report to medical for pregnancy assessment. Silence hit like a grenade. Chopsticks froze midair. Someone laughed nervously, thinking it was a mistranslation. Pregnancy, they must mean malaria. But the interpreter repeated it in clipped Japanese. Every woman looked at the next. Nobody understood what kind of war this was anymore. By sunset, the rumor spread through the barracks, the Americans want us pregnant. Some whispered it was punishment, others said it was sterilization, most just prayed it was a mistake. A nurse named Tanaka Misao, 27, pressed her palms together and whispered, "Maybe they'll use us for experiments." Fear rippled through the tent like static. The women had heard stories. China, Unit 731, the human tests, was this their turn? But when the American medical officer finally arrived, a tall man with a clipboard and a weary face, his tone wasn't cruel. Pregnant women, the translator explained, cannot be deported to labor camps. The words hung heavy. They want to protect us. No one dared believe it. The same army that firebombed Tokyo was now offering vitamins and prenatal care. It felt like an insult wearing a doctor's coat. Yet the paperwork was real. Women who signed the maternal exemption form were given extra rations and soft bedding. By the week's end, over 50 women had agreed. The Americans even built a separate ward labeled expectant quarters. They stocked it with linen, milk powder, and soap luxuries most of these nurses hadn't seen since before the war. Still, shame lingered. What kind of soldier survives by pretending to carry a child for her enemy? Tanaka's hand trembled as she signed her name in katakana, ink bleeding through thin paper. The interpreter smiled faintly. "Congratulations," he said. "You are now safe." Safe, the word felt like a foreign language. Tanaka looked around the tent, faces pale, bellies empty, hearts thudding. None of them understood why this protection existed or what it would cost. But in that moment, one thing was certain. This order was just the beginning of something far stranger. Next morning, Tanaka would face the clipboard again, with a new question waiting for her signature. The morning smelled of damp canvas and disinfectant. Tanaka Misao stood outside the infirmary tent, the paper from yesterday still in her pocket, edges curling from the humidity. Inside, American medics moved briskly, metal trays clinking, boots squeaking against wet planks. When her name was called, she stepped forward, spine straight, eyes down. The same doctor from yesterday, a man they called Captain Reese, gestured for her to sit. "You understand the order?" the interpreter asked softly. Tanaka hesitated. "To become pregnant," she replied. Reese nodded, then pointed at a chart covered with English text. "Pregnant women," the interpreter translated, "cannot be deported. They remain here, safe from forced relocation or labor." For a moment, Tanaka couldn't breathe. It wasn't humiliation, it was strategy, a bureaucratic loophole disguised as biology. Someone in the chain of command had realized if these women were expectant. The Geneva Convention forced the Allies to keep them under medical care. Still, the question burned how. There were no men in the camp, no contact allowed. The guards never crossed the fence lines. Then who will make this happen? She asked quietly. The interpreter frowned, searching for words. "It's symbolic," he said. "A record only. Paper pregnancy." Tanaka looked down at the form. In neat English, it read, "Subject, medical exemption, pregnant yes/no." A simple check mark could decide her fate. Around her, other nurses were already filling theirs. Some hands shook so badly they tore the page. By evening, over 1,000 forms were collected. Reports would later show that nearly 100 women were declared medically unfit for relocation. After this order, numbers that made no biological sense. But in that strange corner of occupied Japan, Paperwork became a life preserver. Tanaka signed hers slowly, her pulse steadying as ink met paper. For the first time in months, she didn't feel like a prisoner. She felt protected by illusion. When Reese dismissed her, she stepped into the humid twilight, the paper folded in her hand. Around her, others whispered about what this meant. Some laughed nervously, others cried. But one question pulsed louder than the rain. If we are pregnant only on paper, who will father this lie? Tomorrow, Tanaka would find out the camp held a secret just for them, one built entirely on deception. By the third week, the new ward stood at the far edge of the camp. 3 canvas tents in a muddy clearing, a white sign painted in English, maternal section. No men were ever seen near it. Guards posted at the entrance carried no rifles, only clipboards. For Tanaka Misao, the silence felt heavier than gunfire. Inside, the air smelled faintly of soap and boiled rice. American medics moved with clinical precision, handing out vitamin tablets and small bottles labeled cod liver oil. Women lined up barefoot, sleeves rolled to their elbows. The doctor, Reese, kept his tone polite, almost apologetic. "You'll receive daily meals and checkups," the translator said. "No work duty, no inspections, no inspections." That phrase spread through the camp like rumor and oxygen. Some laughed for the first time in months. Others cried from relief. The same army that once bombed their cities was now teaching them about prenatal nutrition. By the end of June, their calorie intake had doubled from roughly 1,000 to 2,100 calories a day. Reports later confirmed it was deliberate. American command had realized starvation among prisoners would invite global outrage. Still, the women couldn't shake the irony. "We are eating better as prisoners than we did as nurses in uniform," one muttered. At night, Tanaka lay awake, listening to rain hit the tent roof. No one in this maternal section had morning sickness or swollen feet or cravings. Yet medics continued their charade, measuring wastes, recording growth, handing out baby blankets sewn from parachute silk. The Americans smiled kindly but said little. It was theater with paperwork. One evening, Tanaka helped another nurse, Keiko, scrub the floors. Keiko whispered, "Maybe they really think we are pregnant." Tanaka glanced around. "Then why haven't they brought men here?" The question hovered in the damp air, unanswered. Across the camp, another truck arrived, boxes of powdered milk, canned peaches, diapers. Everything about the setup felt real except the pregnancies themselves. And then, one humid morning, Tanaka caught a glimpse of something that shattered the illusion. In the supply tent, a U.S. medic quietly unpacked a crate of fabric bellies, soft prosthetic bumps meant to be tied under uniforms. For the first time, she understood. The Americans weren't trying to make them pregnant. They were about to fake it. The crate lid came off with a soft creak. Inside, rows of pale canvas bulges lay folded like strange, lifeless creatures, each one shaped to fit under a woman's uniform. Tanaka stared at them, speechless. A young U.S. medic, cheeks pink with embarrassment, mumbled through the translator, "You will wear these for your protection." By afternoon, the camp transformed into a theater of deception. Behind tarpaulins and makeshift partitions, women were fitted with false pregnancies. Elastic straps creaked. The smell of sweat and canvas filled the air. "It's absurd," whispered Keiko, fastening her belt. Tanaka forced a faint laugh. Absurd might be safer than dead. The Americans documented everything. Each woman's file received a stamped notation: gestation, month 3. Medical staff recorded weekly growth. It was bureaucracy dressed as mercy. Later archives would estimate over 600 fabricated pregnancies logged during those months, an operation the soldiers half jokingly called Project Paper Belly. Tanaka caught a reflection in a cracked mirror. Her uniform slightly stretched, stomach bulging just enough to look real. It felt like a lie stitched into fabric. But the guards treated her differently now. Less suspicion, more space, even occasional smiles. The power of illusion was immediate. At mealtime, Pregnant women received double rations. Rice bowls filled higher, and a spoonful of canned fruit appeared at the end of each tray. Hunger that had haunted them since capture began to fade. For once, Tanaka felt the weight of food in her stomach match the fake weight on her belly. At night, laughter returned in hushed doses. Women practiced how to cradle invisible children, how to walk slower, how to lean against walls as if exhausted by new life. It was rehearsed humanity. Still, something darker crept in. One nurse whispered she had seen an American doctor crying alone behind the infirmary tent. He said this was mercy. She murmured, but mercy shouldn't look like this. Tanaka didn't answer. She just tied her straps tighter and looked out into the rain-soaked yard. Then one dawn a sound broke the fragile rhythm. The sharp, unmistakable cry of a newborn from the infirmary. It wasn't a drill. Someone, somewhere in the camp, was actually pregnant. The charade had just collided with reality. The newborn's cry sliced through the dawn like a siren. For a few seconds, no one moved. Then the camp erupted whispers, footsteps, questions flying in 3 languages. Tanaka dropped her ladle mid-breakfast and ran toward the infirmary, her fake belly swaying under the khaki fabric. Inside, the air was thick with heat and disinfectant. A nurse she didn't recognize. A young woman from Nagasaki was lying on a cot, face slick with sweat, a bundle wrapped in a U.S. Army blanket at her chest. The infant's faint cries echoed against the canvas walls. For a heartbeat, everyone forgot the war. The interpreter murmured, "It's real." One of the American medics smiled, relief flooding his face. The rumor spread faster than fire. One of them had actually conceived no prosthetic, no paperwork. That night, voices buzzed across the tents. Some whispered she'd fallen for a guard. Others swore it was a refugee soldier smuggled in before surrender. The wildest rumor claimed the Americans had planned it, that real pregnancies would make the deception stronger. Tanaka couldn't sleep. She thought of the woman in the infirmary, holding a half-American baby while her homeland lay in ruins. The contradiction made her chest ache. How could something innocent be born from occupation? Records later confirmed at least 17 live births across Okinawa POW zones by 1946. None officially linked to assault, most marked voluntary contact. The phrase carried an uncomfortable silence. In the following days, guards behaved differently. They walked slower past the maternal section, voices softer, eyes avoiding the women's faces. The word life had re-entered the camp, but it didn't erase guilt. Tanaka visited the mother 3 days later. The woman smiled weakly. "They say I'll be transferred to Noha," she whispered, "for care." Tanaka nodded, though she knew transfer often meant disappearance. That night, in the dark of her tent, Tanaka whispered a prayer for a child she'd never see. Outside, someone was humming a lullaby. It sounded foreign and familiar at once. The next morning, Tanaka requested permission to assist in the infirmary. She needed to understand who this woman was, and why she said she had agreed. Tanaka entered the infirmary the next morning under a grey, humming sky. The air smelled of iodine and boiled sheets. She found the new mother propped against her cot, eyes half closed, a thin smile barely visible beneath exhaustion. The baby was quiet now, sleeping, tiny fingers clutching the hem of a U.S. Army blanket. "I'm Nurse Tanaka," she said softly. The woman blinked, then whispered, "Soto, Yuki Soto." Her voice was hoarse but steady. For a long while neither spoke. The rain drummed lightly on the roof, each drop counting seconds between worlds. Finally, Tanaka asked the question everyone avoided. "Was it forced?" Soto shook her head slowly. "No," I agreed. Her gaze drifted toward the sleeping infant. "He said there will be no war in this child." The translator nearby hesitated before repeating it in English for the medic, who only nodded, lips tight. Tanaka couldn't decide what shocked her more, the words or the calmness in Soto's tone. There was no shame, no fear, only a strange certainty. For her, this wasn't surrender, it was survival. In the days that followed, Tanaka helped with Soto's recovery. She watched the Americans bring her milk, bandages, even small tins of baby powder. The same soldiers who had once shelled her hometown now bowed awkwardly when they entered the tent. Later records show that infant mortality under U.S. medical care in the Pacific POW camps dropped below 3%, compared to Japan's wartime civilian rate of over 27%. The irony wasn't lost on Tanaka. The enemy was keeping their babies alive better than their own empire ever could. Sometimes at night, Soto would hum to her child a tune from before the war. One evening she looked at Tanaka and said, "Maybe mercy can be learned, even by enemies." Tanaka didn't reply. She watched the baby's tiny chest rise and fall, the only peaceful rhythm left in the camp. Yet guilt gnawed at her. Each fake pregnancy around them felt heavier now, exposed by the presence of this one real life. The war outside had ended, but inside, something deeper was unraveling. A quiet understanding that maybe victory and defeat weren't opposites anymore. When the mail arrived from Tokyo a week later, Tanaka's name was on one of the envelopes. The seal was black. The envelope was thin, creased and stamped with the crimson mark of the Tokyo Censorship Bureau. Tanaka held it as if it might shatter. Around her, the women waited in silence while a translator distributed mail, rare fragments of another life that somehow survived the war. She stepped outside, away from the murmurs, into the drizzle, the smell of wet canvas mixed with something metallic, the scent of rust and sea. Her hands trembled as she unfolded the paper. The ink had bled slightly, but the message was clear enough. Your brother, Hiroshi, died on Iwo Jima. March 1945, no ceremony, no body, just one sentence. Tanaka sank onto a crate, numb. Hiroshi had been 17, still a student when he volunteered. She remembered him laughing, trying on their father's too large army cap. Now he was gone, burned into the black sand of a doomed island. Inside the camp, someone was playing a gramophone. A scratchy swing record drifted through the rain, jarringly cheerful. Tanaka stared at her reflection in a puddle. American boots, American tent, American song, and felt an ache that no language could translate. That evening, during supper, she stared at a tray, steamed rice, canned peaches, a slice of white bread. She thought of her mother in Tokyo, rationing scraps, boiling weeds into soup. Reports later confirmed that by August 1945, Japan had lost over 1 million soldiers, and famine stalked the home islands. "We're eating like victors," whispered Keiko beside her, "but we lost everything." Tanaka nodded slowly. "Maybe they're feeding us because they need to believe they're better than us." Still, she ate every grain. The sweetness of the peach filled her mouth, but guilt curdled it bitter. The Americans had taken her country, her family, and yet, in this strange pocket of captivity, they gave her more comfort than her own empire ever had. Later that night, she folded Hiroshi's letter carefully and slid it beneath her mattress. Outside, lightning flashed over the sea, illuminating the white tents like ghosts. When dawn came, Tanaka walked straight to the infirmary. "I want to volunteer," she told the medic through the translator. For the expectant mothers unit. She didn't know it yet, but that decision would turn her from a survivor into something far more complicated. By mid-August, the expectant mothers unit had a schedule pinned outside the infirmary hand, drawn columns listing classes, inspections, and domestic rehabilitation drills. The title alone made Tanaka pause. Rehabilitation, as if their survival was an illness to be cured. Each morning began with roll call. The women filed out, bellies strapped beneath uniforms, rain dampening their sleeves. American medics, most no older than the prisoners, taught them how to sterilize bottles, measure baby formula, and sew diapers from parachute silk. It felt like theater, but the care in those gestures was real. Tanaka learned quickly. Her hands, once used to dressing battlefield wounds, now practiced buttoning tiny shirts and folding cloth squares into triangles. One sergeant even demonstrated how to rock a cradle. In America, he said through the translator, "Mothers sing before sleep." His voice cracked slightly. Maybe he had one back home. The absurdity didn't stop the progress. By September 1945, 312 women were officially enrolled in these 3-month maternal training courses. Reports describe them as education for post-war adjustment. To the women living it, it was a lesson in pretending to be alive. During meal breaks, Tanaka sat with Soto, who now helped in demonstrations. Her baby tiny, alert mixed blood had become a silent ambassador between worlds. The American guards often paused at the sight of him, unsure whether to smile or salute. One afternoon, Tanaka caught her reflection in a pot of boiled water. Face thinner, eyes darker, belly protruding under khaki. She looked like a woman halfway between lies and rebirth. For the first time, she didn't flinch at her image. "Maybe," Soto said softly beside her, "we're learning how to live after the war ends." Tanaka wanted to believe her. But as dusk fell, a jeep rolled through the mud toward the camp's main gate. Inside sat a man with bars on his shoulders, an American major with the kind of posture that carried both authority and unease. The guards straightened instantly. Whispers rippled through the tense inspection. Tanaka felt her throat tighten. Every fabricated record, every paper pregnancy, every false belly, they were about to be examined. The major's name, someone said, was Collins. And he didn't look like a man who believed in mercy. The jeep stopped in front of the maternal section, with a hiss of wet brakes. Major Collins stepped out broad-shouldered, mid-40s, face carved by war and paperwork. His boots sank slightly into the mud as he scanned the tents. Behind him, a corporal carried a stack of reports thick as a Bible. Tanaka and the others stood in formation, rain dripping from the eaves. Collins's gaze lingered on the rows of pregnant nurses. He frowned, lips tightening. "What is this?" he asked flatly. Captain Reese stepped forward, trying to sound calm. "Medical exemption protocol, sir. Geneva compliance." Collins's voice cut through the air like bayonet steel. Geneva didn't say fabricate pregnancies. Tanaka's heart hammered. The translator hesitated, choosing safer words. "He means, these are humanitarian protections." Collins turned on him. Protection or propaganda? He slammed a file onto a table, pages fluttering, open charts, weight logs, blood pressure readings, all neat, all false. Rain hit the canvas louder now, matching the tension. The women stood frozen. Collins flipped through the pages, his jaw working. "This," he said quietly, "is moral chaos." Reese didn't argue. "Sir, with respect, sending them back means camps, forced labor, maybe worse. This keeps them alive." Collins stared at him for a long time. The only sound was the distant cry of a baby Soto's child. It cut through the silence like a human truth neither side could fully deny. After a minute, Collins sighed. "You're making soldiers into actors," he muttered. "You think that ends wars." But he didn't shut it down, not yet. Instead, he ordered an audit. Every woman's file would be reviewed. Those found unqualified would be deported. Tanaka's stomach clenched. The paper belly that once protected her was now a target. That night, Reese told them quietly, "Be ready. Tomorrow they'll count. Don't panic." Tanaka lay awake listening to the rain, hand pressed to the fate curve beneath her uniform. For the first time, it felt like a noose instead of armor. At dawn, boots echoed outside the start of what soldiers called the midnight census. The storm hit just before dawn. Rain fell in hard, cold sheets as floodlights sliced through the darkness. "All personnel, assemble." A voice shouted in English, echoed by the Japanese translator. Boots splashed through puddles, and the women gathered in front of the infirmary, their shadows stretching long across the mud. Major Collins stood beneath an umbrella, clipboard in hand. Behind him, soldiers carried lanterns that cast a flickering glow on the scene. "We'll verify medical exemptions," he said. His tone was flat, procedural, but Tanaka could feel the weight beneath it. This wasn't an inspection. It was a reckoning. One by one, names were called. Women stepped forward, lifted their uniforms slightly, revealed the fake bellies strapped beneath. Each was touched, measured, recorded. The medics' faces gave away nothing. Those who failed to meet the checklist, no file, no record, no growth, were pulled aside. No one said where they'd go. By sunrise, the trucks were waiting by the gate, canvas covers flapping in the wind. The women chosen for deportation climbed aboard silently, clutching blankets and tin cups. Someone whispered a prayer, someone else began to sob. The engines drowned everything out. Later reports listed 247 women removed from the Okinawa camp that night. No records showed their destinations. Some believed they were repatriated. Others suspected darker routes, forced labor sites, maybe even medical transfers. Tanaka's turn came near the end. Her hands trembled as she adjusted the straps beneath her uniform. The medic pressed lightly against the fabric and nodded. Month 5, he wrote on his clipboard, the lie held. She exhaled slowly, every muscle shaking. Around her, empty beds and silence replaced the laughter that had once filled the maternal section. When the final truck disappeared into the rain, Collins gave a curt nod and walked back toward headquarters. Reese lingered behind, face pale. "It's over," he said quietly, for now. Tanaka didn't answer. She looked down at the fake curve under her tune. Once her shield, now a gravestone for those who hadn't passed the test. That night she couldn't sleep. Candlelight flickered across her hands as she unfolded blank forms from the desk drawer. If survival was written in paper, she'd learn to write it herself. Tomorrow, she would begin forging life on paper. The rain had stopped, but the mud still smelled like iron and rot. Inside the dim infirmary tent, Tanaka sat hunched over a table lit by a single kerosene lamp. The flame trembled with every draft, throwing her shadow across stacks of medical files. Around her, the camp slept guards exhausted, patients silent. She was alone with the bureaucracy of survival. Each folder bore a name, a number, a fake gestation chart. Tanaka's hands moved quickly but precisely, trained from years of battlefield triage. She crossed out one name, replaced it with another, adjusted the month column. A woman who had been deported yesterday was now reassigned. Okinawa Medical Unit. Another who had died of fever was relocated under special medical exemption. Paperwork as camouflage. Lies as oxygen. By dawn, she'd written 68 medical records, each one altered beyond recognition. The Americans would think those women still existed, still breathing somewhere behind the fences. Maybe, Tanaka thought, that was a kind of resurrection. Outside, the first light of morning caught the puddles between tents. She stepped out, tucking her forged papers into a canvas satchel. Her uniform was still damp, the fake belly tight against her ribs. The camp smelled of coffee and diesel. Captain Reese approached from the far tent, eyes tired but alert. "You're up early," he said. She shrugged insomnia. He smiled faintly, but there was something wary in his gaze, like he sensed the quiet rebellion simmering behind her calm. Later that day, Collins ordered another review. Tanaka's pulse spiked as he read through her revised files. His brow furrowed, but the changes blended too neatly with official handwriting. When he closed the folder, he muttered, "You clerks are too efficient." That night, word spread that a few women on the deportation list had been found. Their papers rediscovered, their status reinstated. Tanaka said nothing, but inside, something flickered between triumph and fear. The next morning, as she sorted bandages, a corporal entered the tent. "Major Collins requests you," he said, avoiding eye contact. Tanaka's stomach turned to stone. She followed him past the rows of silent tents, the mud sucking at her boots. Ahead, a lantern burned over a wooden door with stenciled letters, "Interrogation Room No. 3. The room was small, built from plywood and sandbags, smelling of damp paper and coffee gone bitter. A single bulb buzzed overhead, casting a sickly light on the desk between them. Major Collins sat with his sleeves rolled up, a stack of files in front of him. His voice was calm, but too calm, the kind that hides a fuse burning underneath. Tanaka stood motionless. her uniform still damp from the rain. Her fake belly pressed awkwardly between her and the table, absurd in this narrow space. "You altered these reports," Collins said, tapping a folder. "Dates, signatures, growth charts, everything's wrong." The translator hesitated, glancing at her. Tanaka's jaw tightened. "I only followed your order," she said softly. Collins frowned. "My order?" She met his eyes for the first time. "You told us to be pregnant, so I made it true." For a moment, the silence felt physical. Outside, thunder rolled somewhere distant over the Pacific. Collins exhaled through his nose, looking down at the forged papers. They were meticulous, too good to dismiss as incompetence. "You're protecting them," he said quietly. Tanaka didn't answer. Her pulse pounded in her ears. She thought of the 247 women who had vanished that night, the empty beds, the folded blankets. Maybe her lies had kept a few from joining them, maybe not. Collins leaned back, rubbing his temples. "You think saving them this way honors anyone?" She finally replied, voice steady. "I think not saving them dishonors everything." The translator's breath caught. He didn't need to translate. The meaning crossed language by weight alone. For 3 days, Tanaka was kept in that room, questioned, watched, then left alone with her own thoughts. The guards didn't shout. They didn't touch her. They simply waited for her to break, but she didn't. She kept repeating the same line, "I followed the order," to get pregnant. Records later noted she was detained 72 hours, then released due to administrative confusion. No charges filed. No record kept. When she returned to the camp, Collins was gone. His jeep had left before sunrise. In her tent, she found a single note on the table, unsigned. "Your paperwork works better than my command." The next week, she was reassigned to the maternity ward, where the lies had once begun, and real life was now crying in every corner. By early 1946, the camp had changed so completely it was almost unrecognizable. The barbed wire was still there, but the signs now read Rehabilitation Center, Civilian Medical Unit. Soldiers called it the rebirth camp. What once sheltered fake pregnancies now housed the real ones, refugees, widows, survivors too broken to return home. Tanaka Misao moved through the ward like someone who had shed her old skin. The prosthetic bellies were gone. In their place, real mothers labored and cried. The air smelled of antiseptic, sweat and boiled linen. American supplies still came in. Morphine, gauze, milk powder, but this time no lies attached. She had become head nurse under Captain Reese, who now looked 10 years older but strangely peaceful. "They trust you," he told her one morning. "You built this with paper, now you're building it with hands." Under her supervision, over 200 infants were born in the first half of 1946. Each one documented meticulously, real names, real dates, no fictions. The war was gone, but its ghosts lingered in every wail and every lullaby. Sometimes, Tanaka would catch herself watching the mothers the same way she once watched her comrades on the battlefield, counting breaths, fearing silence. She realized that care and survival were the same instinct, just spoken in different languages. One afternoon, she found an old crate of false bellies stacked behind the supply shed. The fabric was stiff with mildew, the straps frayed. She stood there for a long moment, remembering the terror, the whispers, the theatre of mercy. Then she ordered them burned. The smoke rose white against the grey Okinawa sky, curling like incense for the women who never returned. That night, the ward was quiet except for the soft mewling of newborns. Sato's child, now toddling, giggled as he tried to walk between 2 cots. When he fell, Tanaka caught him midair and laughed a sound she hadn't made since before the surrender. Captain Reese watched from the doorway. "You ever think you'd end up here?" he asked. Tanaka shook her head. "I thought I'd die pretending to give life. Now I live by helping it begin." But before Reese could answer, a runner arrived from the gate, envelope in hand, addressed in unfamiliar handwriting. It was from Major Collins. The envelope was yellowed by salt air, its edges soft from travel. Tanaka turned it over in her hands as if it were something alive. The name written on the front, Tanaka Misao. was in English, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Major Collins. No return address, no seal, just the faint impression of a thumb smudge where the ink had bled. She sat on the steps outside the infirmary, watching the sun set behind the Pacific. Around her, the camp buzzed quietly with life, babies crying, pots clanging, waves breaking beyond the fence. The war had been over for almost a year, yet its echoes still moved in every sound. Captain Reese approached, wiping his hands on a towel. "You going to read it?" he asked. Tanaka shook her head. "Not today." He nodded, said nothing more, and walked back toward the ward. She ran her thumb over the flap. Part of her wanted to know. Was it apology, gratitude, confession? Maybe Collins wanted to justify the madness, to name the line between mercy and manipulation. Maybe he couldn't live with the memory of that night, the files, the lies, the women standing in rain pretending to be mothers. But opening it meant going back, and Tanaka had promised herself she would only move forward. She stood, crossed the yard toward the tree behind the supply, shed the same tree where the fake bellies had once hung to dry after inspections. The bark was scarred, the ground still dark with ash from when she'd burned the last of them. She dug a small hole with her hands, placed the envelope inside, and covered it gently. "Let it stay closed," she whispered. Some truths breathe better in silence. That night the ocean wind carried the faint scent of salt and smoke. In the ward, a newborn wailed, and Tanaka hurried back inside, her footsteps quick and sure. She lifted the child, pressed him to her shoulder, and felt the tiny heartbeat against her chest, steady, insistent, alive. Outside, waves broke against the shore, washing over the ghosts of everything that had been faked, forced, or forgiven. History would forget her name. The rosters listed her as missing. But in that camp of paper lives, she had written one thing real. Mercy can look like madness until it saves you.